So, Jeff, very serious situation here. Why don't we start with Milton? This will be the first time that the Tampa Bay area has taken a direct hit from a major storm in almost a century, since all the way back in 1921. In your mind, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what does that mean about the potential impact to residents and also property?
Yes, it's very clear here that the entire coastline there of Florida, especially Tampa down to Fort Myers, should be on alert here and taking the proper precautions to either evacuate or mitigate their homes as much as they possibly can against the damaging potential of wind, but especially storm surge in this event.
Jeff, I think what I was trying to get to is that we're starting to see storms in more areas that generally aren't as impacted, or the storms are more severe. This is an area that hasn't seen a big storm in almost a century. I mean, generally, would the construction be built with the idea that a hurricane would come through, whether it be residential, commercial, or even government?
In some cases, yes, but in many cases, you see a lot of coastal structures, a lot of coastal properties that are built at grade, so maybe not on stilts, not at elevation, and all these coastal properties, especially in Tampa, St. Pete area, are going to be tested, and those codes that are in place, the building codes, are going to be tested as well. Mm-hmm. So this will be one of those events that everyone in the markets are going to be watching very closely. But it's very clear here that, like as you mentioned, Tampa Bay, has, in St. Petersburg, has not seen anything like this in quite some time. So it'll be quite interesting to see just how these buildings respond. But there are quite a few that are built, at grade and will be subject to quite severe storm surge risk.
And certainly wishing the best to all the people there. I want to turn back to Hurricane Helene for just a second. So your best estimate when it comes to the damage from Hurricane Helene is about $11 billion. I thought it was pretty interesting. Most of that's actually coming from wind, not from water or anything else. When it comes to Milton, we've actually seen the winds increase by about 90 miles per hour just over the last day or so, according to NBC. As a lot of these areas are recovering from Helene, Milton's coming in with these strong winds. I mean, what are you expecting? How damaging could this be again to property? How, life risking or a life endangering could this really be?
Well, there's a couple of things to note. I mean, first, the building codes in the state of Florida are some of the strongest in the country. However, there's going to be a lot of overlap in the areas affected by Milton as compared to the areas that were affected by Helene just a few days ago. So you're going to have a lot of instances where damage could be exacerbated, it could be worse, because those structures have already been, prone to damage just a few days back. And that could be tricky in terms of trying to understand, just how much worse things could get, and also trying to figure out which event actually caused the damage. But the building codes are very strong in Florida, and especially along coastal areas. And so we'll hopefully see some of those build back better techniques and those strong codes take action. But it will be challenging, especially with all that debris that is still on the roads in places like Tampa, that it's just going to make matters a heck of a lot worse when it comes to seeing the oncoming impacts of Milton in just a couple days.
I've covered a hurricane. I was actually in New Orleans for Hurricane Ida, so I've seen some of the damage. I just want to emphasize the estimates you're giving us, that's for insured losses. When we're talking about uninsured losses and other things outside of that, how bad could this really be?
Well, it's too early to tell just how impactful it could be, but generally speaking, you see the biggest gap in water losses between, say, insured and economic, because not as many people have flood insurance coverage. So with a storm like Helene, as we saw a few days ago, and whatever water impacts are to come, the economic toll could be a lot bigger, and usually is a lot bigger when you're talking about the water impacts. But given how much that coastline from Tampa down to Fort Myers is in the cone of uncertainty right now, that represents one of the biggest, if not the biggest, area along the Gulf coastline that has exposure and then subject to not just insured losses, but damage to economics. So we couldn't say quite yet, but this is going to be quite a noteworthy event across the board, whether you're talking about insured or economic losses.